1 or 2 person drone shop trying to build recurring revenues, a global drone service provider managing an international fleet, a brave early adopter trying to figure out how to integrate drone services in to improve your value chain, or a member of academia racing to develop curriculum to ensure we have a sustainable workforce, or one of those poor souls who's tasked with trying to regulate us misfits. No matter who you are, you're on a team. That team, our team, is working to get together every day to build one of the fastest industries of our lifetime. And that's why I say I'm both grateful and proud that I've been allowed to be a member of that team. So thank you. For years, psychologists have studied the effects on young men and women when they have been forced by circumstance to assume adult responsibilities. In layman's terms, we call it growing up too fast. And a common trait among those young men and women is that they tend to be a little awkward. Psychologists explain that that's because they're having to make decisions about the future while still trying to understand the world around them. Industries also have a growing up phase that starts at introduction or birth through growth and then hopefully ultimately maturity. Less than 3 years ago, only a handful of the top companies in the top industry sectors in the world listed the integration of unmanned systems into their processes as a key initiative. Less than 3 years later, that number has increased to over half. That rapid demand for adoption has forced our industry to begin to find out ways to deliver valuable, tangible services to ensure the credibility of our industry. And it's happened quickly. Some would say before we were actually ready to deliver those services, and certainly before we had figured out the regulations. So I would argue that we've been forced to grow up so quickly that we are perhaps a bit awkward right now. But we're not the first industry to experience this. And as such, we have the opportunities to learn from the lessons of the past. And just maybe, if we work together as a team, we can get through the turbulence that we're about to enter. That's the first of several goofy puns that are on the way. A key trait of maturing industries is a shift from a vision-driven to a market-driven market. In traditionally paced markets, that transition occurs gradually and somewhat peacefully. But when it's a rapid-paced industry like ours, that transition can be fraught with turmoil and can way too often lead to the untimely demise of some of the very visionaries who sparked our industry. It is at the same time unfortunate and predictable. As new technology is adopted and growth begins, early market companies, often weighed down with significant amounts of investor debt, find that they cannot compete with their smaller, more agile competitors. Having grown faster than the market, they find it very difficult to reel in and align their business models to fit market realities. That's when we start to see heavy amounts of lobbying, heavy amounts of marketing, efforts to maintain market position and influence. Sometimes it will work, but generally it doesn't. And their exit from the market allows for the necessary shift of leadership and influence for long-term sustainable industry. Now, am I saying that companies in our industry must fail for us to be successful? My answer is direct, explicit, and absolute. Maybe. Let me be more succinct. Vision is necessary to ignite and grow any industry, and it will continue to transform ours through development of new products, expanding service application, enhancing production models, and opening new market opportunities. However, vision and hype will not sustain our industry without eventual product demand, and when that product demand occurs, it is incumbent upon us to deliver valuable products that create revenues, recurring and increasing revenues. And only then has the industry achieved market validation. Now, if you haven't liked what I've had to say so far, you're definitely not going to like what I got to say next. Product demand has been generated, and very real signs of market validation are emerging everywhere. This is incredible, and we should be talking about it. You should be going down the halls and looking at sessions talking about how great we're doing in certain sectors and how successful we're being. The industry and advocacy groups should be promoting that, but we're not. Because these points do not always support desired narratives. And these narratives are way too often the soapbox foundation of the very folks that we've entrusted to promote our industry. As you may imagine, I'm involved in dozens of alliances, organizations, committees, roundtables, turntables. There's something for everybody, right? And all of which are committed in one way or the other to promoting the UAS industry. This year alone, I've received over 7,000 emails covering every imaginable topic: BVLOS, large UAS, UPP, IPP, WTF, but always membership dues. They never miss those. The fonts and the words are slightly different, but the message is always consistent. Help us influence policy to facilitate adoption of drone technology. Help us shape a regulatory environment that will pave the way for industry emergence and growth. The implication is subtle. Only through continued efforts to guide policies and regulation will our industry ever really get off the ground. Sometimes the message is not so subtle. Now, I'm talking to only one person in the room right now. I know you're here. I'm not going to call you out. I did not know the person that wrote this was going to be here this morning until I came on stage. In one of the email correspondence that was going back between the groups, the question was presented: should we reallocate some of our resources and some of our efforts to promoting the commercial success of the companies in our region? And what you see was the response. And if you can't read it, I'll read it for you. It said, "I agree this is worth discussing, but nobody's making any money, and anything to suggest otherwise could jeopardize our funding." That group is committed to promoting the success of our industry. But why let facts get in the way of a good narrative? I'm going to share some data with you about DroneUp. I don't like to spend a lot of time talking about me, and I don't like to waste your time standing up here talking about us. But here's what I will tell you. Over the past 12 months, our inbound inquiries for service have increased by 1,000%, while our marketing budget has remained flat. Deal size has increased by 20%. Client expectations of pricing have come into alignment, and we are controlling and raising core price to manage and control a manageable 100% month-over-month growth. Demand, performance, premiumization, commoditization. Ladies and gentlemen, we have product demand and market growth textbook without BVLOS, without counter UAS, without even a perfect traffic management system. And you know what else I didn't mention? No notable instance, not with us or our partners. People ask what we're doing special. And I'll tell you in a moment. I'm going to open the kimono and tell you our business model, exactly what we're doing, because I feel like I'm going against everybody's recommendations in doing that. I'm just kidding. This is not just DroneUp. I can name a dozen, maybe 24 other companies in our industry, with services ranging from flight operations to processing, data services, analytics, security, and more, all of whom are identifying and pursuing current market opportunities that are feasible under existing regulations. Companies who understand, like us, that the best way to ensure our industry's stability is to remain steadfastly focused on operating responsibly while providing tangible value. BVLOS, asymmetric data protocolling, AI-enabled dispatch, and the many other technologies on the roadmap will extend our capabilities and contribute to our growth and sustainability. Let me say that again. They will extend our capabilities and contribute to our industry's growth and sustainability. Companies and organizations who develop platforms and technologies to enable longer flights and heavier payloads have a valid interest in their policies that will enable the realization of their business model. And we have a commitment to continually evaluate policies that will safely provide for that. But we must invest an equal amount of time, ensuring that by doing so, we do not inadvertently cause a negative impact to the existing and growing business operations. The value of product demand and market growth I mentioned earlier is paramount to the success of our business. It shifts the conversation from what can be, what might be, what should be, to what is. It shifts the narrative of how drones are portrayed in the media and on Capitol Hill. And by doing so, it also lowers the barrier to longer range autonomous opportunities that will vastly expand what we are doing today. And from our perspective, and I think on this I speak for my partners as well, we simply ask that consideration of any policy, new policies, that could potentially impact our ability to conduct business or that of our partners be delayed just a bit, because if we're going to finish inspecting the nearly 4,000 square miles of parking lot and the roofs of over 6 million commercial buildings in the United States, the more than 600,000 bridges, the more than 120,000 acres of solar farms, the 128,000 railroad crossings, and the development of 3D models of over 130,000 schools in our country. 3D models, by the way, that are invaluable to emergency responders in emergency response situations at schools. If we're going to get all that done, in addition to all the other valuable things that we're doing for the public and private sector today, we're just going to need a little bit of time. And by the way, that little bit of stuff I just named, it's about $7 billion in industry, a revenue to our industry. $7 billion. No policy changes. And we can do it. Drones are changing the world. And the pace of that change is and will be driven little by the number of new policies are created or the number of advocacy groups are assembled. No, that real change will be the result of how quickly the market adopts our services. And nothing will promote that better than a proven record of safely delivering services that are more valuable than what is available today. Last week, Bloomberg article, headline read, "Drone Bubble Burst, Wiping Out Startups and Hammering VC Firms." The author highlighted the unrealized expectations of our industry. He talked about these companies that had shut down after burning through millions of dollars. And then on the heels of that, we hear the news of another company in our industry that unfortunately laid off a significant number of people last week. These things, these types of news stories, these types of headlines are a bigger threat to our future in this industry than any three-letter acronym you're worried about right now. By the way, on a side note, I used to say the only people who could be wrong more than 50% of the time and keep their job were weather forecasters. I've now added analysts in our market, in our industry, to that list. I stated earlier that I would share what we were doing, and I will. People like to call it secret sauce. It's not really that secret. It's on our website. So we have amazing technologies innovative processes, strikingly brilliant people, and an unwavering desire to succeed. And so do just about every other company in our industry, including some who have already left and some who will be leaving shortly. That's not the difference. No, the 7 differentiators that I think that we're using right now that are helping us be successful they're simple, repeatable, and most of all, they're shareable. And they get better, but I got to start with number 1, and my team who is in the room is going to laugh when I say this. We answer the phone. My group of people who work with me and support all of our efforts a bunch of them are sitting up front, and they will tell you that you would be stunned at the number of jobs that we have won this year that the comment was, you were the only one that called me back. There's a whole lot of us in this industry for us to be the only one to call them back, but I would be willing to bet 30%. Fair enough? 30%. 2 is we undersell. We focus on 3 words with any new project. And I look at every project that's gone wrong in our industry, and I think if we'd applied these 3 words, we probably wouldn't have had those problems. And those are affordable, achievable, and actionable. We realize what we're doing is new. So it's important that if we're going to try to present or we're going to try to engage a new customer, we need to make that first engagement affordable so that they are willing to go into it with realistic expectations of what the outcome is going to be. Number 2, is it achievable? Can we do it with our people, with our pilots, with our platforms, with current regulations? But more importantly, can we do it over and over and over again to deliver consistent results? And the 3rd is it actionable? Are we actually going to get results from this that are going to deliver ROI and value to our customers? And if we can't, we walk away. And we have walked away from some very large projects that others have taken and wish they had walked away. We operate lean. Now, a lot of people say that. We have one of the most technologically advanced pilot management and deployment platforms in the industry, able to deploy and manage in one-to-one and one-to-many bidirectional communication while deploying missions and collecting the data, and we've got patents filed on it, and it is really cool. And on staff, we have a total of 0 full-time software developers. We're also formally onboarding with Lance right now. We've been lauded for our marketing and communication, for our brand. In the last 6 weeks, we've had people who've recognized us in 9 different countries. We have a continuous increase in new pilots coming on board, and I told you about our inbound sales inquiries. So we do pretty good on marketing. I'm excited that my entire marketing team is here today with us, and I'm very proud of both of them. How are we able to do that? Because number 4, we value partnerships. I've been in a lot of industries, from the military, through the technology world, into this world, and I've never seen an industry that is so diametrically opposed to partnerships. It's amazing. I mean, it's stunning. We are not. In fact, I am proud of the fact that that killer technology platform that I told you about, we picked a firm that built it and has been a partner with us, and as a result have become a leader in the UAS software industry, and they're so committed to our success that their executives are also here with us today. Good partnerships. Number 5, and I wish everybody remembered this one, we care for our people, we care for our brand, we care for our industry's reputation. In that order. And people say, well, what about the clients? Well, if I'm taking care of my people, and I'm making decisions and delivering products and services that protect my brand with consideration of the impact it might have on my industry's reputation, guess what? I pretty much have to take care of my clients. Number 6, we're financially agile. We're lean. Our platform allows us to scale. VC is not a bad word, it's just not something we've done. So we've had the opportunity to allow our company to grow with the market and to the market. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, none of these are unique to our industry, Tom. Just sounds like some pretty good business advice. I agree with you. But if our industry is ever going to reach its maximum potential, we have to stop acting like drone people who are trying to build a business and start acting like business people who are trying to build an industry. There's one more differentiator, and to me, it's probably the most important. And it comes from something I wrote a long time ago while I was still in the military, had hair, and didn't look like this. And I still read it to new members of my staff when they come on every day, and it goes like this: be proud but not arrogant, confident but not cocky, and never waste your time telling somebody how you're better. Tell them how you're different. Let them decide if it's better. And it is that last part that I think should apply to our industry right now. What we're bringing to solve with our customers, what we're bringing to them is so new that even prospects that approach us sometimes approach us like you would a stranger that was unusual looking and made you a little uncomfortable. We recognize that it's new. So number 7 is that we're patient. We don't sell, we discuss. We explain the differences, we explain what drone services are. We let them make the decision of how the data that could be collected integrates into their workflows and their work processes. And once they begin to adopt and find the need and fit it into their strategy using their own approach to their own business, then all we have to do is deliver. And it turns out that is just a little more successful than some of the other approaches that people have tried in the past. Let me close with this. It may sound like I'm being a little tough on our industry. And for that, I make no apologies. But I can assure you there's no one in this room or out of this room that doesn't believe in this industry or love this industry more than me. But here's what I will tell you. We and we alone, we control the destiny. We control the growth rate, we control the growth pattern, we control everything. Not the FAA, not even Congress, not even our customers. Because at the end of the day, if we continue to deliver valuable, tangible solutions, the customers will continue to buy. They will continue to validate our market. They will continue to drive product demand. And the value of what we're delivering to the industry, if we're doing it safely, responsibly, legally, and our industry is willing to promote that success instead of what we're promoting now, that will have more influence on the policymakers than anything else we could do. Thank you again for the opportunity to share my thoughts, and enjoy the rest of the conference and the rest of your speakers.
So again, just very quickly on me, I started DroneBase in 2014. Prior to that, I was had early access to this technology in the military. Was in the Marine Corps, was an infantry officer, and had some access to this technology in Iraq, Afghanistan, a bunch of other countries in the Middle East. And to us, what I think we saw was very clearly this technology was sort of like the computer. When I got in the military, a drone felt like a mainframe computer. It was basically a Global Hawk. It was an airplane, took off from a runway, took 55 people to fly it, even though nobody's on it. Very much like a mainframe computer. We watched these systems get smaller and smaller and more powerful to the point where we could send someone who was in the infantry, who had not been to college, to a 2-week training course. They come back with a little backpack drone, take it, throw it, fly it. So maybe that was like to the personal computer level. And I'm sure in the military now they've kind of gotten maybe to the iPhone level with the drone. But just very simply, what this technology did for us in the military was it gave smaller and smaller and smaller units, really democratized access to air, where we could get data and imagery from the air and make a better, faster decision from that data and imagery. And again, I know everyone here is savvy and a veteran of our industry, but I think the commercial context is not that dissimilar in that drone technology is really democratizing access to air, enabling many, many more people to become pilots, enabling many, many more companies to get access to the air. And what does that give them? It gives them imagery and data from the air. Ideally, that imagery and data should be helping them make a better, faster decision. And I think that just, as an industry, maybe a year or two ago, most of our projects were in the innovation groups of companies, and that's fun, that's exciting, that you can always do interesting stuff. But I think, much more important now is really working with a P&L holder of a business unit, and you really have to be taking costs out of their business or adding to their revenue. Unless drones are great, robotics are great, but unless what you're doing for them is saving them time or money, ideally, taking costs out or helping them make more revenue, that's really getting to the real business we get to today. So, I think just quickly on me, just after the military, I went to business school, did all my research on drone commercialization, wrote a few papers on how our industry might break out, worked very briefly in finance, and then left to start a company in our industry. No problem. And I'll just kind of take you through where we are today. So, what I want to talk today about was, I think that today, state of the art, when we first started doing this, we're attaching GoPro cameras to drones, like a fisheye lens, some low-level megapixel. Today, I think that the photogrammetry and imagery slice of the business is definitely maturing. I think that we feel good at our company that we can offer, national coverage, 20 megapixel camera with, the associated metadata that can get customers to some level of value, that can get you a map of some level of accuracy. If you add certain things like arrow points or ground control points, that can get you a further level of accuracy. And that's good. I think that gets you to some just imagery alone gets our whole industry to some level of value where there's a good amount of willingness to pay and we can take some costs out of a business. But I do think that what's much more exciting is that what we see is that several types of higher value add, more advanced sensors are coming online and onto the market. Some are here now, some will be out in the next 12 months, that will really provide a much more high value, essentially a causal data set that's much less of a nice to have for customers and more of a must have that can really finally be better, faster, cheaper than what they're doing today, really finally replace an in-person on-the-ground crew and really change the way that company or enterprise does business. So just things that we're thinking about in terms of what's important there. I think that first, we think a lot at DroneBase just about how to scale this, how to scale drone technology generally. So that's really been our focus for the past 3 to 4 years as a company, is having a really simple API for customers where you can send us 1 or 10 or 1,000 or 10,000 addresses, and being able to offer customers a national SLA with a national price, for those 10,000 addresses. Generally speaking, for imagery, our company is comfortable signing up for about 48 to 72 hour turnaround from essentially any U.S. address where it's not restricted airspace, where there's no waiver attainable. We've gone through and gotten many waivers ourselves. So I think that, one challenge that we face, I think, as we see these more advanced sensors is just how do we get that same scale nationally on thermal sensors, on LiDAR sensors, on some of the sensors that'll come out for the oil and gas industry. It's certainly like a non-trivial challenge, but I do think for customers, we really, for enterprises that own assets all over the country, all over the world, it is very important for them for every flight not to be like a one-off consulting project, but to really be able to tell them, this is what this costs, whether it's in Washington, Texas, Oklahoma, Tennessee. And just kind of know that generally that's priced appropriately, where there's enough margin for your company to make money and for the customer to get good value. So, that's certainly a challenge. I think on 20 megapixel imagery, an Inspire 1, a Phantom 4 Pro, even a Mavic Pro, like those are ubiquitous systems. They're deployed everywhere. Not incredibly difficult to, I think we feel very good about the scalability of those. But really, like, there are many fewer pilots who will invest in an XT1, an XT2, a proper LiDAR sensor from Regal or others. The other sensors that are going to come online in the market are even more expensive. So kind of how do we think about, how do we get really these deployed in a national way? The second point we think about a good bit is, pilot training and expertise. So certainly, I'm sure many folks in the room here are drone pilots. You've probably done your own training. You might have taken a course online. You might have taken a training mission from Drone Base, maybe even went to DJI's UTC program, or you've done things from companies that are specialized to do training for drone systems. I think that we do feel that pilots across the U.S., that have built good expertise in imagery capture, imagery acquisition, whether that's more contextual on a building or a vertical asset, or if you're leveraging an automated tool like a drone deploy or another tool to do automated flight, that feels somewhat mature. But I think that when we're talking about more advanced sensors, it's definitely a further investment for a pilot to really gain mastery of that sensor. So one example I would call out is I think a great example of training that a pilot can get on an advanced sensor is FLIR's Infrared Thermal Training Center program. So FLIR has a 3 to 4 day in-person training, in thermography and sort of the art and science of thermography. They've been doing this work with handheld cameras for decades, and drones are an incredible platform to capture that same type of thermal imagery and data in a much better, faster, cheaper way. However, it's not just a cookie cutter port over from imagery to thermal. There are some nuances to it. There are ideal times of the day to do the capture. There's ideal ways to do the capture. There's things you would do in imagery you would not do in thermal. And so, one thing we've been working on, in close partnership with FLIR is really building out a national, a national scale offering where all of our pilots that we're sourcing are schoolhouse trained by FLIR at FLIR ITC. I think we've just found that it's not good enough for someone to have sort of tried to figure it out with that sensor. We feel much more confidence when folks are schoolhouse trained by FLIR. And you'll see more examples of that, but that's an area where, if a pilot takes the opportunity to invest in themselves and in their training, we feel that much more confident in their abilities. And that really is a nuance that you just wouldn't pick up by buying an XT1 or an XT2. And one thing I would call out too is that we're pushing hard for military veterans who have potentially used FLIR tools or FLIR products in their military service to go to this follow-on training. So folks who have used FLIR tools in the military and are trying to build a commercial career can continue to leverage their products. So we feel really good about that pipeline. Similar training, I think, is certainly required when it comes to LiDAR sensors. And then again, as other sensors come online, you'll see dedicated training just to those. And then the final thing that we think about is how do we, affordability, just ROI positive, affordability. We never want to say things are cheaply done or inexpensively done, but really these things have to be done at an ROI positive price. So as Mavic 2 or Inspire P4 Pro or Inspire 2 even, not that expensive of a system, but for all these sensors, you're typically talking about $10,000 plus investment. So we really think through, how do you mitigate the upfront cost of a customer, and for us too, the upfront cost to a pilot of, how in the world am I going to get these deployed across 40, 50, 60 sites? Because if the first thing that a customer has to do is buy inventory of $100,000, $1 million, it just makes a sales conversation that much harder. And similarly for pilots, we think about this a lot. Just how, there certainly are pilots who will go and make these investments in these systems themselves. That's great. Those are folks that we will look to reward at the very top of our list with thermal flights, LiDAR flights in their area. But how do we mitigate the fixed cost for the pilot? Because it's really not our expectation that if one thermal flight comes up in your area every month or every quarter, it's maybe not reasonable to ask you to go purchase the system. It may not feel like you're going to make your money back from that. So how do we mitigate those upfront costs both back to the customer and to the pilot? You'll see active experimentation, and we're actively experimenting with a bunch of different business models there and seeing which one is the best fit for our pilots and then kind of provides the best value back to our customer. We're looking at various things like a leasing model, a subscription model, a lease-to-own model, and potentially a rental. And we're really looking to the pilot community guide us to what's most beneficial for them and kind of what's their preferred arrangement. So they're not outlaying for a sensor well in advance when they get paid back. Like, how do you match the payback period much more closely to when you're getting paid for your missions? So like I said, if I had to kind of phase out, kind of had a stage where this would go, I do think that, these sensors will escalate our industry from often a nice to have augmentation to what a ground-based crew is doing to a must-have causal data set that is a true replacer of what you would be doing, at the site on the ground. So, I think, again, today with just 20 megapixel imagery, typically happens, hundreds of dollars a flight. There's some good baseline verticals that we're all involved in there. For our company, we feel good about for about a 48 to 72 hour turnaround for, national SLAs. I think that, thermal and IR, thanks to mostly, to FLIR and their integration with DJI on the XT1 and XT2, that's feeling increasingly mature, in 2019. That's an area where pricing is significant step up, probably adding a zero to thousands of dollars a flight. And there's just things where that thermal data set is just causal. I mean, a solar panel inspection of a solar farm, inspection of a roof that has solar panels, and many types of roof inspection. Imagery will tell you very little compared to what you'd get from a thermal image set, which would tell you kind of instantly where you have a critical problem or where a solar panel is damaged. So, again, that's a nice step up in terms of, a must-have and a kind of a causal set of data. And then I think, LiDAR has felt like one of those technologies that's been 6 months away for the past 3-4 years, which is frustrating, obviously. But I do think that there are good reasons to believe that is going to become very real and much more affordable, much more scalable on platforms that we all know and use. Within the next 6 to 12 months, I thought it would be here today, but we're confident that comes out in the next 6 to 12 months. And again, many folks here are already well versed in that technology, but for those who aren't, in terms of LiDAR, that's where you're really getting an engineering grade quality model, an engineering grade quality map of a more complex asset where, again, instead of augmenting a surveyor crew or augmenting a sort of line inspector of a vertical asset, you really can get very close to replacing them with much more accurate models of complex vertical assets like a cell phone tower, a wind turbine, a transmission line tower. So, that's a causal data set that's also important. Not on here, but, other areas that I think are worth just people thinking of in the back of their minds. Oil and gas is energy. Oil and gas is obviously a very large industry. There's plenty to do with them in imagery and LiDAR, to some degree with thermal, but I do think there's reason to believe around oil and gas that some sensors will come online to, again, really be that causal set of data for them to detect the types of methane leaks or oil, methane and gas leaks that are most important to them that'll come onto a drone here. Again, I think reasonably hopeful in the next 6 to 12 months. That's a much more expensive sensor that will drive much more valuable insights back to customers. I think that for again, us on thermal, we're investing really heavily against smart logistics and software to stage, deploy, and then recover those systems in an affordable, fast way. I think that generally today we're comfortable signing up for about 3 to 4 day turnarounds. Sometimes it's a week if that's a really far-flung asset. So we want to be, we really want to push the operational boundaries of that thermal deployment on a national way. LiDAR, I'd say that like our goal is about a 1 week turnaround, although candidly we're not there yet. But that's an area we'll push hard against as soon as that sort of sensor airframe mix are ready to go real time. And so I guess, just for folks in this room, and I know people do everything up and down the stack in our industry, but things I would point out, challenges and opportunities for advanced sensors. All these areas the whole stack is far less mature. So within imagery, let's say, imagery is not that new. There was imagery being captured from helicopters, airplanes, and satellites well before drones came around. The processing of those images, I talked to Antoine from Pix4D as we were coming in here. I'm not sure where he's sitting now, but there's just much more mature from the capturing of imagery to the processing of imagery to sort of the basic analysis of imagery to then many niche players who are good at pulling insights from imagery. That's a much more mature area where you can find 3 to 4 to 5 companies that all do a really good job. If you had your orthomosaic images for a map, if you had your 3D images for a model, there's a good stack of folks who you can really get an end customer solution to more easily. So I'd say a challenge and an opportunity around all these types of sensors it's a much less mature market. So there's just very fewer players who are capable of thermal mapping, thermal modeling. I mean, I could count them on my hand. In terms of actually pulling real insight and analysis from thermal imagery, again, it's a very small list, in some cases non-existent for certain use cases. So I think that's challenging, but it's also an opportunity for folks to kind of build there where it's less mature and less is built. That is certainly the case for LiDAR, and that is absolutely the case for other things like a methane gas sensor for oil and gas. So there's just a lot of white space there where we even companies like ours are looking to say like who is the leader here. Sometimes it's clear, sometimes it's less clear. So I think that's an area to build, and that's an area where you just find a less mature solution to get your customers sort of that end value where you can give them a report, a decision from the advanced sensor data that you're gathering. Another challenge and opportunity for advanced sensors are around AI and ML insights you can pull from them. Probably in the next, at this conference, I'm sure you'll hear these buzzwords quite a bit, and you should always be skeptical if you hear multiple buzzwords. So drone plus VR or drone plus AI. It's a little bit of a in many, it's a bit of a tell that like you never want to combine 2 speculative technologies at once. But I do think within imagery, that is something that's happening in real time among all the leading companies, is that we're generally looking for the same types of anomalies across all these different assets. And so as we are pulling reports and we're aggregating data, it seems kind of foolish not to be leveraging AI and machine learning to start to pull these insights out in a programmatic way. Probably where you're augmenting your manual report builders at first, and then speeding them up, and then ultimately, doing many more reports with many fewer manual people in the background. So, again, for what I would call out is that, for example, like just our company, DroneBase, has 150 terabytes of drone imagery and data from the kind of hundreds of thousands of commercial flights that we've completed. that is probably a rich enough data store to really start to pull insights programmatically, automatically from our imagery. In addition to that imagery, there are just these sort of well-known, just basic image libraries like a COCO, Common Objects in Context, where you can sort of just tag on to some bigger projects people have done to already sort of characterize and build a glossary of these types of anomalies you're looking for. Again, what I would call out for you is a challenge, really, but an opportunity on all these advanced sensors is to get to a data threshold where you can start to pull that type of automated insight. Very few people have, I really think no one actually has gotten there on thermal, on LiDAR, and on other types of advanced sensor data. So I think that's sort of a race at the moment to see who can aggregate enough to really start to pull things automatically, programmatically from that data. Maybe you'll see someone build out like do that in a more open source way. We haven't seen it yet. So, I think that's an interesting challenge and opportunity for advanced sensor data as well. It's sort of like a white space area where somebody had that, we would like to tap it, but we just haven't found that opportunity yet. And I really try to leave plenty of time for questions here, so I'll go through this pretty quickly. I don't think this would be like a shocker to anyone here. I'm sure most folks here are familiar with thermal imagery and the reports you can build. But I just think, like, again, talking about a nice to have versus something that's causal. Obviously, with a thermal inspection of a building, you're really pulling out the data that's causal back to a customer. That would just be not obvious from capturing imagery. Again, just this is somewhere we flew maybe a week ago. This was a new building, so really very few problems here. But just one solar panel of all those seemed to be a bit of an anomaly, and that's where this wasn't a critical error, but it's something we would recommend if you're doing a routine inspection or if you had something scheduled. That's where I would direct someone to go take a deeper look, right? I wouldn't say that wasn't flagged as like a critical error. It was a relatively new building. But I just say that, you could look at the image on the left all day long. It really wouldn't tell you that much. Whereas a thermal image on the right, without even much training, you could clearly identify, your panel at the bottom right. If you have an issue, it's with that panel. So again, that's why I say sort of a causal data set of just points your customer directly to where the anomaly or directly to where the problem is. And again, just another example of what would be completely non-obvious via just imagery that is instantly obvious via thermal, and that's equally true for other types of advanced sensors. And just for example, this is not even updated, but it's probably from like a year and a half ago, just to show you some of the opportunities and challenges here. This is broadly where we find folks that are in our pilot network. So, a good dispersion around the US, maybe in the parts of, Nevada or Eastern Oregon, we could be happier with our coverage. But, this is from a year and a half ago, so we're even further along than this. But then, this is for folks who've actually gone and to own and operate their own thermal gear. It's much less, right? So, if you just compare the coverage of one versus another, as we're sourcing, let's say, a thermal flight in Atlanta, those folks who have gone out and made that purchase, invested in that equipment, they bubble up right to the top of our sort of sourcing algorithm. But one thing that we've gone and done is we were able to surface those pilots who have, the Inspire 1 that an XT1 could go on, or the M210 where an XT2 could go on, and we're surfacing those via our automated dispatch platform, and we're asking them, hey, could we ship you a thermal sensor for this flight, just to reduce their costs and to give more people sort of a crack at this higher value data work without them having to go buy without the first step for them having to buy like a $10,000 plus piece of equipment. So I do feel like we have good national coverage, but it's really probably not going to be via expecting pilots to go out and invest tens of thousands, high tens of thousands, $100,000 in their own inventory and hardware. I think that's probably an unreasonable expectation. All right, with that being said, I did want to, I think we're about a half hour in, I wanted to wrap up there, and just any questions, I'd love to take them, or just thoughts you have, or positive or negative feedback on our company. Happy to listen as well. But thank you all so much for coming to listen today. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with each of you. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Got a question about the service. I've been signed up for quite some time, I think over a year now.
Yeah.
And I'm in rural central Washington.
Okay.
And I don't know if it's just because of where I'm geolocated. I haven't got any.
I'm sorry. I regret to hear that. Yeah, look, it's like every person under our roof is, including myself, are working day and night to find great enterprise opportunities to route and source to folks like you. I think that we were, in the past year or two, probably favoring getting folks a bigger book of business. This year, we're trying to be we're trying algorithmically, honestly, to allocate things a bit in a bit wider way. But that's like the word. I hear that feedback a good bit, just being honest, and like it's my least favorite thing to hear. But I promise you that every person under our roof are trying to get you opportunities. If you come up to me afterwards, I'll get your name and stuff, and I hopefully can remedy that in the next like month or two. But I think we're working hard on that. I ultimately think our industry will be very supply constrained, and we view what you do as a new class of skilled labor. I think we're eager to get to that point of supply constraint, which I think we get to in the next 24, 36 months. It's just been, it's when we started this company in 2014, honestly, today I would expect it like millions or tens of millions of commercial drone flights to be happening, where it would just, our hair would be on fire you'd be trying to get stuff off your schedule. So we're all just trying to get to that inflection point as fast as we can. But no, thanks for your feedback.
Fair enough.
Yeah. But come talk to me afterwards and I'll.
Could be just because I'm so rural.
No, we work, I mean, look, we work all over the country, and we'd love to, trust me, like we really, I think we try to get everybody meaningful work, ideally in the first 6 to 12 months. And, that's something we think about a lot. Yes, sir.
Talking about the new sensors, in percentage, like out of the jobs that you are fulfilling, is thermography 1%, 0.5%, 5%? Can you try to quantify those new sensors, including maybe even LiDAR, if you ever have a request, but put some numbers to put things in perspective?
Yeah, so no, I think that's a very fair question. I mean, imagery is definitely the most mature. It's certainly the majority of our work. I would say, my rough handicapping, I think that, actually we were pushing so hard in thermal that I'd say kind of getting towards double-digit percentage, probably high single-digit, getting towards double-digit of our flights, but it's growing very quickly. So we'd like to do more and more of that. So we feel that that's certainly a growth area. LiDAR is less, still single-digit percentage, but I think also growing quickly. And I think what's nice, and this is for just all of your businesses as well, is that those do have outsized impacts just because the pricing, the data is much more valuable, therefore the pricing is higher. And so we see those have, even if from a mission level, they're a lower absolute number, they do have outsized impacts in terms of just like the revenue back to our business or your businesses. Yeah. Is that fair? How does, sorry, well, I shouldn't ask you Pix4D questions, you don't work there anymore, but. Yeah. Yes, sir.
As you get in the more technical type of missions and flights, how do you ensure your subcontract pilots and you're meeting the same requirements and you're relaying those properly? Are you building a catalog of this is what you will get as a package, or does this get more expensive? Your insurance, who's handling the insurance for the equipment, the contract completion?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? I mean, I think that we've had to think long and hard, and have sometimes learned the hard way on how we think about pilots, their professionalism, and sort of the path of becoming a drone pilot. Like I think that our view has always been to work only via our community and respect the skills of pilots and really treat them as that this is a new profession and it's a skilled labor profession, and we want pilots to be compensated accordingly. Probably like a year and a half ago, and look, there are many Part 107 pilots, right? Maybe perhaps we think that there are too many, right? Or like that we're oversupplied in a sense. I think at last blush from the FAA, I think the last public number was like 120,000, and that's probably a little higher now. So we would like to have information, or as close to perfect information, on that entire community as possible. But from there, we think a good bit of what is like the appropriate journey for a professional drone pilot. So for us, that typically starts with some training missions to just validate systems and sensors and sort of where you are and capability to do basic work. I would think for us, sort of a non-enterprise tier of work would be just basically, in real estate. That's really the only, I'd say, non-enterprise vertical. And about a year and a half ago, we really started to think harder about an enterprise tier of pilots with vertical specific training for each one of those verticals. And some are more prohibitive than others, right? So I mean, in aggregates and mining, folks might need to have an MSHA OSHA cert, or for oil and gas, they might have to go through other qualifications. But for us, it's a pretty clear threshold. Typically around, having done like 8 to 10 missions with us, we'll look at someone potentially as an enterprise pilot. We'll typically run our own background check on them. Happy to take a look at what they've done otherwise. And then we're typically only sourcing enterprise work from that tier of pilots or from that tier of verticals. And then in the past year, I think what we'll be doing more and more often is really standing up sort of a cloud specifically for customers. All the pilots are from the enterprise tier, and they also are going to go through customer-specific training that customer has developed, and that's often on site, and it can also be sometimes remote. On site is always preferred. In terms of insurance, for better or worse, we ourselves carry a significant and it's unfortunately expensive insurance policy, particularly for when we're shipping sensors out to folks that just cover the operations of our network and our flights. In the rare cases where something's gone, I think that, knock on wood, we haven't had to activate that policy yet. But I think that's a cost. That's certainly like a high and increasing cost on the insurance side. But we feel like that's something we can do for pilots when they're flying, under our network to get things done. So for flights that we're sourcing, we have an insurance policy that covers the operations of our network. Yeah. But no, it's a great question. It's something we think about a lot. And to be honest, there are tiers of work that we actually just won't pursue because we feel like they're most appropriate for employee pilots under one. We've said no to certain opportunities where it just really had to be pilot employees who are W-2 employees of that company who have gone through kind of X, Y, and Z, and that customer is going to interview each one of those pilots. I think when we feel like it's not appropriate, we just don't engage. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Our industry is being served by other industries, specifically like Perkins Coie in the world of law, and global aerospace in the area of insurance, and many more. Is there a potential for, or even existing yet, some type of a financing specific for drone industry, so we can afford these large, costs and have maybe an incentive there for just us to be able to get into this type of sensors?
Yeah, and look, that's a great question. We've thought about it a good bit. Like for us as a company, I think we always want to make sure on the pilot side we're basically paying pilots to do work and trying to pay them, in a truly fair way in relation to what we're asking them to do, and not ask them to do things that we kind of wouldn't do ourselves. So I think we've tried to have a good and again, I'm sure we've gotten that wrong on a mission-to-mission basis, but we try to have a good social contract if we're going to compensate the pilots that work with us, we're going to compensate them. We've thought a lot about like what ancillary services we could offer. We just want to make sure whatever we offer is really good. And financing is one of those things that we've looked at. I think we're actually, in the thermal context now, we're running some smaller focus groups just to understand like what do pilots want to do? Like, do you want to subscribe to something where you could access a thermal camera for less money? Do you want to lease to and then eventually own it? Do you want to lease it and then eventually give it back to us? Like different car type models. Or do you want to just we want us to help you finance it where you own it at the end of that financing? And I do think that's going to become more and more relevant, and I could see that happening. We see that happening across sensors, but also airframes, as more specific airframes come out that are more and more expensive. Or just even in the DJI context, like a DJI government edition, I don't expect, I don't even know if that's going to be generally available or for pilots to be able to purchase that system. So how do we equip you with that for if there's like an appropriate state or federal job that system would be applicable for? And then also accessories like, let's say, for example, arrow points is one we hear sometimes required on a flight. Like, what's the appropriate way for, what do pilots want to do? I'm curious to see what the feedback will be. We've generally taken the view of let's just try to make the financial impact on you or on the pilot minimal and just get that system out to them and try to price it appropriately to the customer and not necessarily charge the pilot for it on that end. But we'll see what we hear back on. I think that there are interesting models out there where, people could sort of serve as a source of inventory in a region, use that inventory when it was useful, and then get it out to other folks when it's not being used. So we think a lot of just about like asset utilization rates, and I just want to make sure those are high, and I'm not financing you to buy something that's like got cobwebs in your garage. But no, I think those other services are a great opportunity. We probably passed on some chances I think we haven't got our heads around all of them. For us, I just want to make sure we are paying pilots. We're paying pilots out. They're getting paid by us to do their missions, and we're not, and we're getting them the type of model that they generally like. But I think that's a great point, and there's a lot of services that that folks need. Yes, sir.
For LiDAR, what are you seeing in terms of standard platforms? What the LiDAR units on? Do you see a kind of common platform? And then what are the use cases where you're seeing something push into the range of needing LiDAR?
Yeah. I think that's probably been the biggest, I think the frustration has been I would say that there's not I'm confident in the next 6 to 12 months that there will be in kind of an airframe sensor that we will all be able to rally around. I would know my kind of go-to 2 or 3 now, but I don't think that they're standard or that all of us would have them on the tips of our tongues here at this conference, right, where we all kind of know this industry well, or that there's some acceptable customer standard. I mean, there are some, but they haven't really been brought in the way that DJI brought down hardware pricing on imagery. That's comparable sort of price reduction on just the hardware side hasn't really, and ease of use hasn't really happened yet. And we feel that that's something that's going to happen in the next 6 to 12 months. So we haven't seen it yet. And that's why I think that that's not quite game time ready. But as soon as that is, I think many of us will be pushing hard into that. Most applicable, I think, when, we've done endless sort of maps and models of, more specific industrial type of assets. And that's, I think, basically just think about how expensive is something that you're flying over that's like a vertical asset. Anything that is pretty darn expensive, cell phone tower, wind turbine, transmission line, those are all applicable, I think, for proper LiDAR mapping. As well as, again, I think that what you'll see is both LiDAR sensors on a drone for the drone to be smart about where it is. So mitigating crashing into a very expensive asset that you're flying around and over, as well as a LiDAR sensor on the drone that's providing that data set back to you. So I think that it's really those, People have come a long way on photogrammetry, on a cell phone tower, on a transmission line, on a wind turbine, but it's still difficult, and the reliability is not where we want it to be. So those are the types of assets where I think LiDAR really will provide an engineering grade model that will truly replace kind of a line crew, or a line crew could go do that work themselves and be more efficient. So I think it's some sort of ratio of like, are you flying over something that's really expensive? Yes, and it's sort of a vertical asset. Yes, sir.
Just a follow-up question on that. Given the cost of LiDAR, are there alternative strategies being looked at, like the combination of radar and images? Are those being explored?
Yeah. I do think I've seen a couple good mix of imagery and LiDAR where sort of together the model has more fidelity and more accuracy. To be honest, what we just try to be simple, and we don't overthink it. I think that if someone makes a 10x hardware breakthrough, we'll happily take that up. But I think we have good kind of hope that in the next 6 to 12 months we'll see some good breakthroughs that are really LiDAR only, solely LiDAR, that will be that will bring the cost curves down in a way that feels appropriate for sort of mass use and mass adoption, where hopefully this time, Interdrone 2020, we all sort of agree, hey, this is the platform to go use, and we've all sort of agreed on it. So I think we're less trying to break that ground ourselves and more hopeful, not just purely hopeful, but I think we've good reason to believe that like that a more mature system will come out that will help bring that cost curve down. But no, I think that's it for today's state. I think that any plug or there's many good workarounds and hacks to get good fidelity models and mix in imagery with LiDAR to get you a better model. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Mike. It's great to be back, but this thing about following Michael is not, it's not working. I need about 8 more cups of coffee to be anywhere near his energy level. But like I said last year, I'm with the federal government. I am here to help. And you laugh. I don't get that. But seriously, thank you, Mike, for that introduction, and thank you, Interdrone, for inviting me to speak here again. As you all know, August 12th, Steve Dixon was sworn in as the 18th FAA administrator. So I have resumed my original role at the FAA as the deputy administrator. And I am really excited to be working with Administrator Dixon. And even though we spent large parts of our earlier careers as pilots for competing airlines, Steve at Delta and me at American, we actually have a lot in common. We both started out as Air Force pilots. In fact, we both went, there's an Air Force person, all right. We both started off at the Air Force Academy and at the FAA. We both have a laser focus on operationalizing the FAA's agenda, and that includes your agenda. And because of the commonality of our paths and Air Force pilots and commercial pilots, and we have been referred to by some higher-ups as the dynamic duo. But as I said at Steve's swearing in, please don't call me Robin, and don't call Steve Batman. But what you can call us are UAS integration advocates, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. It's usually true that when summer heats up, life slows down. But in your line of business, the summer has been anything but sluggish. This summer has been all about action, and the kind of action that suits the operators that come to Interdrone. Construction, cinema, photography, inspection, agriculture, all that stuff that Michael was just showing you, public safety, energy, surveying, even feral hog baiting. The list goes on and on because you're finding more and more unique ways to use drones every day. We're making big progress on real-world testing for how to safely and securely integrate drones into the national airspace, or the NAS. And we're developing or delivering new rules to codify what we're learning so that drones can become regular participants in NAS operations rather than just special or waivered one-offs. And I'm just going to editorialize here. We did not discuss our presentations, Michael and I, and I can't believe how really perfectly they're gelling, because many of the things I'm going to talk about that we're doing and we're thinking about are tied very closely to what Michael says we need to be doing, and I just want to say that we're really excited that he's chairing the DAC, and we're heavily invested in educating today's drone community, especially hobbyists, on what they can and can't do. And as we all know, an uninformed recreational flyer in the wrong place at the wrong time could ruin everyone's day, recreational and commercial, by threatening manned aircraft or innocent bystanders. In fact, if you were looking at the news just yesterday, here in Las Vegas, a medevac helicopter had to do a go-around to avoid a drone while approaching a hospital helipad. And since mid-April, the FAA has held 7 drone webinars, 3 public safety seminars, and 2 Facebook Live question and answer sessions that reached nearly 70,000 people, generating about 4,000 questions or comments. Now that sounds like a success story for outreach, but while 70,000 may seem like a lot, we're just scratching the surface. And when you consider that we've already registered more than 1.4 million drones, and we all know we haven't registered all of them that are out there, and there are almost 150,000 certified drone pilots. It sounds like most of them are working for Michael. So let's talk about some success stories for keeping the ball moving forward on integration. Last month, we saw significant approvals and action in North Carolina, North Dakota, and Kansas. States participating in the UAS Integration Pilot Program, or IPP, which Secretary Chow launched 2 years ago. Through the IPP, 9 state, local, and tribal governments across the U.S. are partnering with industry, companies in this room, to develop UAS regulations, policy, and guidance through practical applications. Perhaps more importantly, they've become the match that is lighting a creative fire in the industry and in the public for what this novel, new form of transportation might achieve. Now, North Dakota had 2 major IPP success stories in August. For one, Xcel Energy can now remotely inspect a portion of the power lines outside an operator's visual range along a stretch of urban roads in Grand Forks. I didn't know they had urban roads in Grand Forks. They can do this in both daytime and nighttime conditions under a 1-year waiver the FAA issued to the North Plains UAS test site. And as you might expect, there are caveats. While the operator is in a remote location, there's a person launching the drone at the remote site, and command and communication links limit the beyond visual line of sight, or BVLOS, distance to a few miles at the moment. And while Xcel has been using drones for several years in remote areas to inspect electric and natural gas infrastructure, this is the first time they've been approved for BVLOS flights within a city. I don't have to tell this crowd the significance of the waiver. It's the first Part 107 waiver we've ever approved for BVLOS ops without visual observers in an urban environment. XL isn't spending its time and money on a whim. Inspecting distribution lines with drones is safer because crews can get details on our energy systems without the use of helicopters or bucket trucks. In Bismarck, North Dakota, we just issued a Part 107 waiver for the Highway Patrol and the Burleigh County Sheriff's Office to operate drones over people. Another advancement in operational capabilities. As you can imagine, each waiver is unique, and each rests on the foundation of a successful safety case that the applicant made to the FAA. And I want to thank Michael for emphasizing safety, because what's included in a safety case, and this is very important, are the location of the requested operations, the altitude, the reliability of the equipment, and, in the case of operations over people, what injuries might be caused by a bystander if the drone fails. And approvals may also be contingent on mitigations to reduce consequences of a failure. The safety case for a Part 107 BV loss waiver we just approved for the Kansas Department of Transportation has several layers. The flights will inspect power lines along a 9-mile route in rural Kansas over the next few months. The approval is based on a number of safety nets. The drones will operate next to man-made structures, power lines in this case, where they are much less likely to be sharing the airspace with manned aircraft, and they will use an onboard detect and avoid system. The operators in the ground control system will also have access to additional traffic data. Now, let's talk about a waiver we issued in mid-August involving drones flying over moving vehicles in North Carolina. Drone maker Flytrex, working with drone services company Causey Aviation Unmanned, will use the approval to fly food from a distribution center across a highway to customers at a sports and recreation park. This is part of an IPP with the North Carolina Department of Transportation. Now, their safety case for flying over the vehicles included the demonstrated reliability of the selected drone and, as a potential mitigation for failures, Flytrex's self-triggered parachute recovery system. Now, Flytrex developed the parachute system using standards set by the FAA and American Society for Testing and Materials, as we all know, ASTM. Now, those examples make clear how much practical progress we're making with the IPP. Now, when matched with the companion program, the Unmanned Aircraft System Traffic Management, or UTM, pilot program, or altogether, UPP, geez, aren't you glad we have acronyms to sort of clear everything up? We're making concrete progress toward full UAS integration. That's all we need to know. We launched the UPP, not to be confused with the IPP, program 3 years ago to help us figure out how to do drone air traffic management. Because unlike a lot of countries around the world, we're not into segregating operations. We never have been, and we know we can't be going forward about segregation. It's about integration. And integrating drones into the national airspace with manned use flying, much more challenging, but once we lock it down, once we figure it out, then we're in business. NASA and the FAA have been working on UTM since 2015. It's essentially a set of concepts and tools that we are developing with industry to safely manage dense, low-altitude drone operations. And UTM, as I said, is not a specific equipment system. It will be complementary to the existing air traffic management system and will not replace it. We're working closely with NASA, who has done some of the heavy lifting with its UTM technical capability level, or TCL, demonstrations. But we're also running our own, FAA is running our own UPP tests. We've made some significant progress this summer. In June, the Mid-Atlantic Aviation Partnership demonstrated separate BVLOS drone flights delivering packages, studying wildlife, surveying cornfields, and covering a court case for TV near the Virginia Tech campus in Blacksburg, Virginia. This is all a simulation. All of the operators submitted their flight plans through a service supplier and received approval. And none were flying in airspace where regular FAA separation services were provided. The true value of a UTM system became obvious when a simulated emergency helicopter needed to transport a crash victim to the hospital in the area where the drones were operating. The helicopter pilots submitted a request for what we call a UAS volume reservation, a UVR. That's an alert that the UTM system delivers to nearby drone operators. And in this case, the deliveries were rerouted, the wildlife study, field survey, and court coverage continued, but safely away from the helicopter's path. We ran similar tests in Grand Forks, North Dakota in July, and here in Vegas in early August. In both cases, either medevac helicopters or first responders submitted UVRs that allowed multiple drone operators doing other business in the vicinity to safely accommodate the high priority flight. And you think about the example I gave earlier yesterday when the helicopter coming near the hospital helipad had to go around. If we had that system in place and if everybody was being the good actor, that drone would have been nowhere near that helicopter. There would have been a UVR and it would have avoided the space. A key element of these UTM tests is having some form of remote ID, which Michael very accurately pointed out. The ability for those managing or monitoring the traffic to be able to contact the drone or its control station or both when necessary. And we plan to publish a draft rule later this year on the all-important remote ID regs and standards. Other regulatory advances we're making include a new proposed rule we published in February that will allow Part 107 operations over people and at night. We received more than 900 comments that we're now evaluating and going through. So that's a lot of work enabled under Part 107. But as you know, there is also a great deal of activity outside of Part 107. In fact, 7 of our 9 IPP lead participants or their partners are applying for Part 135 certificates to be able to deliver goods. One of those participants, Wing Aviation, has already received its approval in April. The Part 135 certificate has much higher safety hurdles, including type certification for the drone and an economic authority approval by the Department of Transportation. But the future payoff for the additional safety measures and certification requirements are important because they're going to lead to more liberalized operation. Wing, for example, will initially operate only in certain rural areas around Blacksburg, Virginia. Down the road, as we gather more data, it's likely that companies like Wing will take the lessons learned from these flights and apply them to more complex operating scenarios. Helping with all of this is Secretary Chow's support for IPP and UPP and a regulatory push from Congress. A whopping 130 pages of FAA's 5-year reauthorization bill that President Trump signed into law last October includes many drone-related provisions, including instructions to streamline the Part 107 waiver application process that Michael pointed out as a priority in the DAC, and to consider industry recommendations in all other areas. A task, as Michael explained to you, we just gave to the DAC. I think even the most skeptical among us would have to agree that the FAA and industry have made a lot of progress of late. Some would say it's been too slow in happening, but it's accelerating and it's exciting. That even so, we're still in the crawl phase of our crawl, walk, run strategy for full integration. So if we're in the crawl phase, what do we consider walking? More urban operations, day and night. More BV loss flights of longer distances and multiple UAS per flight path and per operator. And if that's walking, what is running? Well, I'm not sure we've fleshed out what running really is yet, have we? I mean, not too long ago, I would have said running was urban air mobility, flying taxis, the Jetsons. But given how fast everything moves in this industry, it's just possible that UAM is already so 2020. But I guess I'll find out what your vision of what running means when I walk through the halls here in a little bit. I'm looking forward to that. In any case, walking and running are probably not that far off, especially given the hot pace that we've all set this summer. So, thank you once again for allowing me to come up and address you all, and I wish you have a really, really successful conference, and I'm looking forward to seeing the displays and seeing the floor and what's going on. Thank you very much.
So, imagine this. You're a volunteer drone pilot or an aid worker, and you're in this village that's just been affected by a terrible cyclone. A bunch of people died, a bunch of homes were destroyed. And you're using a drone to make a map of this community to facilitate, disaster reconstruction, assessing the damage, all the stuff that humanitarians usually do. And after you're done making this high-resolution, fantastic drone map, you upload this drone map to an open-source data website, which is something we do a lot of the time now in the humanitarian sector, so that other people can learn from it and use it and make tools from it. That's all great, but then you discover, about a couple weeks after you uploaded this drone map, that there was the ethnic minority that lived in that village that are being targeted by a violent local militia. And you discover, to your horror, that this local militia has used your drone map to plan a really effective attack on this village. They've killed people. So your drone imagery, despite your best intentions, has been used to harm people, even to kill them. What do? What are your responsibilities or your obligations? Was there a way you could have prevented this from happening? That's what I'm here to talk to you about today. So my name's Fane Greenwood, and I work on humanitarian technology, ethics, data security and privacy, and just the overall implementation of drone technology in harsh environments and in difficult contexts around the world. So I've been working on drone technology since about 2013, and ever since then, I've become really interested in ethical use of this technology in ways we can advance the technology and better understand the risk to improve the drone industry. And again, drones are really cool. Drones let anyone look at the world from above, and that's something that we couldn't do even a few years ago. Without drones, there's really very little way to look at the Earth from above unless you're rich, rich enough to have your own, back in the 1700s or 1800s, your own hot air balloon. If you have the skill to be a manned aircraft pilot, those were all restrictions to looking at the world from above and collecting that kind of aerial data. But nowadays, almost anybody can do that. We've really democratized the collection of aerial data. And that's really cool and impressive. And this capacity, this access, is what attracts humanitarian aid workers to drone technology. Humanitarian aid workers are very interested in big data, just as many of us in the private industry are. And they're really interested in ways to quickly and effectively and cheaply, because aid workers are notoriously underpaid, ways to make new conclusions about disaster and make their services better and more effective. As one example, in early 2019, a terrible cyclone hit Mozambique. So a bunch of people were displaced, a bunch of villages were destroyed, and the World Food Program used drone technology to map these flooded areas, and they used these maps for damage assessment purposes. And the World Food Program and the European Union's humanitarian wing are now mapping Mozambique's floodplains to ensure that a similar flooding disaster is less bad in the future and really mitigate the risk. That's just one of many awesome examples of how drone technology can be used to help people around the world. And I'm sure you guys can think of many other great examples. But here's the problem. If we want to see more use cases like this, if we're going to realize the remarkable potential of drone technology, we have to get serious about understanding what the actual risks of collecting that data are, and about considering both the upsides and the downsides of making the aerial view accessible to everyone. We've done a good job as an industry of considering the physical risk that drones represent. So the risk of a drone like falling on somebody's head, the risk of a drone obstructing airspace. We take that really seriously. But we haven't considered as deeply the risk that drone data represent. And as we're learning in our current era of social media privacy scandals, holding more information about people or collecting more information isn't always a good thing. We need to do a better job of researching these risks. And we need to consider the fact that data can be either digital gold or toxic waste. It can be something that can both be incredibly valuable and something that can be really dangerous if we don't treat it with respect and responsibly. And people are concerned about drone data, as we know. They're concerned about these risks, and that makes people really uneasy about our technology. A drone's ability to effectively extend human sight is what most of us value about them, but it's also what makes a lot of people distrust drone technology. Military and civilian drones are enormously conflated in the popular imagination, as I've seen over and over in my work and my research. People project many of their fears of surveillance, loss of freedom, and other common, modern dystopian technological fears on the drone technology. It's a highly symbolic technology. I can't even tell you how many times I've heard some tough guy in a bar tell me when I say I work on drones that, oh, I'll totally shoot down a drone if I see one flying over my property. I'm sure that's probably happened to many of you as well. People get really defensive about drone technology. And while we know that civilian drones are, generally speaking, a pretty terrible way to spy on somebody in the era of smartphones and smart home devices, most people don't know that. Or at least, I'm pretty sure that people don't like drones. I'm pretty sure that people have these strong opinions about them because here's another problem. We have very little good public opinion research or policy research on drone technology. And actually, some of the best research that we do have is coming out of the University of Las Vegas right here. But, there could be a lot more of it. And most of that research is restricted to the United States and Europe. So as one example of what that research, when it happens, looks like, there's some great research out of Denmark in recent years that found that people are most disturbed by the inscrutability of drones, the fact that it's hard to tell who is looking at you from the eyes of a drone, or who's behind it and what their motives are. That's really interesting information for us as drone industry and drone pilots, but we need more information like that to make choices and decisions based on